Welcome to a quiet night of ghostly tales. As the world slows down, we'll drift through haunted places and restless spirits, carried softly by stories meant to guide you into sleep. Do you believe ghosts are echoes of the past, or something still watching us now? Let me know your thoughts, and together, let's step into the whispers of the unknown. Tonight's story is about a sound, not a scream, not a voice, but something far quieter and somehow far more chilling: a knock. A simple, ordinary knock that can echo through walls, through hearts, and sometimes through time itself. People across centuries have spoken of it in hushed tones, the knock before death. It begins, as these stories often do, in a house much like any other, a place of comfort, warmth, and life. But at night, when the air grows still and every sound feels sharper, a hollow rap on the wood can cut through the silence like a pulse. Once, twice, 3 times. No one at the door. No wind to blame. Just that patient, deliberate sound, as if something unseen is asking to be let in. In Irish folklore, the 3 knocks of death are said to come when a spirit stands unseen by the doorframe, heralding the departure of someone within. Families who heard it would freeze in place, not daring to move, not daring to speak. To answer the door was to invite what waited outside. Some said it was the soul of a loved one, come to collect another. Others whispered it was death itself, polite enough to knock before it entered. There's an old story told in the Scottish Highlands of a widow who lived alone by the sea. One stormy night, she heard 3 slow knocks at her door. She waited, heart pounding, expecting a traveler seeking shelter. But when she opened it, there was only the blackness of the night and the roaring wind. The next morning, news arrived that her only son, a fisherman, had drowned when his boat capsized just as the storm began. The villagers still speak of how she had heard his final farewell, carried on the knocking of the waves. Across the ocean, similar tales took root in early American folklore. In the Appalachian Mountains, families spoke of the death tap, a faint, hollow sound on the window pane that signaled an approaching tragedy. No one ever saw what caused it. The sound would come once, twice, then vanish. Within days, someone in the home would fall ill, or a letter would arrive bearing sorrowful news. Elders in those regions warned children never to knock at night, never to playfully tap on walls, for it was seen as tempting fate itself. Even sailors had their own version of the omen. On nights when fog blanketed the decks and visibility was lost to the endless gray, crews sometimes reported faint tapping sounds along the hull. Some believed it to be trapped air or shifting wood. Others whispered it was the spirits of those who had drowned at sea, warning of another soul soon to join them. When the knocking was heard, men would cross themselves, avoid sleep, and pray that it was not their turn to be taken by the deep. What makes these stories so powerful is not just the superstition, but the quiet certainty with which they are told. The knock is not always loud, nor meant to frighten. It's often described as gentle, rhythmic, deliberate, as though whoever or whatever is making it doesn't want to terrify, only to announce its presence. Some believed that the dying could send a signal, a faint echo that traveled ahead of their departing soul, reaching the place where their loved ones waited. Others thought it was the barrier between life and death itself flexing for a moment, allowing the sound to slip through. The idea of sound as a messenger has deep roots in human belief. We've always trusted what we can hear even more than what we can see. In silence, a knock becomes a heartbeat of the unseen. It reminds us that the air around us isn't empty, that maybe something watches from just beyond the walls we build. And when the house settles, when the pipes creak, we listen, hoping it's only the wind, but never completely sure. Sometimes the knock comes not at the door, but from within the walls themselves. Old homes seem to breathe with age, but those who've lived in haunted places will tell you the difference. A death knock feels intentional. It knows when you're alone, when you've just extinguished the last light, when your thoughts have gone quiet enough for it to reach you. It waits for that moment, then sounds, one measured tap after another, as if from fingers unseen. There's a story from Wales of a young couple who heard knocking at their bedroom wall every night for a week. It always came at the same time, just before midnight. At first, they dismissed it as an animal in the rafters or the settling of the old farmhouse. But on the seventh night, the sound changed. 3 knocks, slow, even, hollow. The husband rose to check, lantern in hand, but before he reached the wall, the flame flickered out. In the morning, a letter arrived. His mother had passed at midnight, 7 nights after the knocking began. In folklore, the number 3 often carries significance: birth, life, and death, body, mind, and spirit. The triple knock is said to mirror that trinity, marking the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. To those who believe it is not merely a coincidence of sound, it is a signal, a rhythm from the other side, echoing through the last moments before the world changes forever. As centuries passed, these tales endured, whispered from hearth to hearth, passed from elders to children. In every culture, the knock comes quietly, but its meaning resounds through generations. It has no language, no face, and yet everyone knows what it means when it's heard in the stillness of night. The fear of the death knock isn't just born from imagination. It often comes from moments people swear were real. In small villages, these stories became warnings, told in candlelight, and skeptics were few. Many who claimed to have heard the knock said it carried something more than sound, an atmosphere. The air would grow heavy, colder, as if the house itself was listening. Sometimes animals would stir before it came. Dogs would lift their heads, whining softly. Cats would vanish into shadows. And then, the first knock would fall, echoing faintly through the room like a hand on the edge of reality. In old Ireland, where superstition and faith blended into everyday life, the knock was believed to be part of the natural order. Death was not a stranger, but a guest who arrived with warning. Families who heard it didn't always fear it. Some took it as a message that someone dear had found peace. In remote parishes, it was said that the spirit of the dying could travel ahead of its body, returning home one last time. A gentle rap on the door was their way of saying goodbye before the journey beyond began. There's a quiet story told from County Mayo about a woman named Moira who lived alone in a cottage at the edge of a bog. One night, while tending her fire, she heard 3 clear knocks on the wooden door. She hesitated, but did not open it. Instead, she whispered a prayer for her brother who was away at sea. The next morning, a messenger arrived with the news. His ship had been lost, and all hands gone. Moira believed her brother had come to her one final time, his farewell carried by the echo of the sea on her door. In another version of the legend, the knocking doesn't warn of a loved one's death. It predicts your own. The story goes that a man in Edinburgh, a watchmaker by trade, used to laugh at the superstitions of his neighbors. One night, as the clock struck 12, he heard a distinct tapping sound, soft but steady, coming from the inside of his workshop door. He thought it must be a prank and opened the door quickly, but no one stood outside. The next night, the knocking came again, this time louder. By the third night, his laughter was gone. He told a friend about it, pale and trembling, saying it felt as though the wood itself was breathing. That same week, while walking home, he collapsed in the street. His heart had stopped. His apprentice later said the knocking in the workshop never returned after that. Not all the stories are old. In rural homes, even today, some people still claim to hear it. 3 soft knocks at night with no source. There are modern accounts of nurses in hospitals who say they hear faint tapping on the doors of rooms where patients pass away shortly after. One nurse in a London hospice told of a night when she heard a quiet knock from a patient's room. She entered to find the man peacefully gone, his hand resting on the table beside him as if he'd just finished knocking. Skeptics say it's all coincidence, a sound carried by wind, the expansion of wood, the creak of old floors. But to those who've lived it, there's something unmistakably deliberate in the rhythm. A house settling makes uneven sounds, unpredictable and scattered. The knock before death, however, feels conscious. It waits between strikes, patient and aware. It happens in the quietest hour, when the veil feels thin, when the night itself seems to lean closer. Some believe these knocks aren't from spirits at all, but from time itself echoing backward. That the moment of death creates a ripple, a shock that moves in both directions, forward into the unknown and backward into the present. The knock, then, becomes an echo of that instant, a message that slips through the cracks of time before the final breath is even taken. It's a poetic notion, but one that comforts some and terrifies others. And yet, there are those who have tried to test it. Paranormal investigators, particularly in the early 1900s, conducted experiments in old houses reputed for death omens. They would sit in darkened rooms with notebooks and candles, waiting, listening. The stories say that sometimes they heard it. 3 slow raps from nowhere. No footsteps, no drafts, no reason. The investigators would mark the time, and within days, someone in the household, or in their own families, would pass away. Many of those reports have been lost, written off as hysteria or fabrication. But in the circles of ghost hunters and folklorists, the phenomenon still has a quiet reverence. There's a chilling consistency across centuries and continents. The knock is never frantic. It doesn't break or hammer. It's calm, controlled, deliberate. It behaves as though it knows it will be heard. Even those who deny superstition find themselves holding their breath when they hear such sounds at night, pausing before they move, as if instinct itself still remembers something ancient. Perhaps what frightens us most about the death knock isn't the sound, but what it represents. A reminder that the veil between life and death is thinner than we pretend, that endings might have manners, that even in death, something reaches out politely before crossing through. There are moments in these stories when the knock feels almost compassionate, as if whoever lingers beyond the veil is not trying to frighten, but to comfort. In some families, it's said that the sound is made by ancestors, watchful spirits who still guard their bloodline. When the knock comes, it isn't a warning, but a gentle calling, a familiar voice reminding the living that none of us truly leave alone. These families would light a candle, whisper a prayer, and thank the spirit for their kindness. To them, the knock was not an omen of doom, but a message of love that crossed the border between worlds. Yet just as often, the stories carry a darker shade. In Old English villages, people spoke of the knocker, a restless phantom said to wander from house to house in the dead of night. He was never seen, only heard, and his knock always came to the door of those who had offended the spirits in some way, those who disrespected graves, mocked old customs, or refused to offer a prayer for the dead. When his knock came, no one answered, but everyone inside would wake, hearts pounding, knowing that someone in that household would not see another sunrise. One unsettling account comes from the town of Northumberland in the early 1800s. A blacksmith named Robert claimed to hear 3 knocks every night for a week against the heavy oak door of his forge. Thinking it was a prank, he stayed up late one evening with a lantern and waited. At the stroke of midnight, the knocking came again, loud and deliberate. He flung the door open. No one was there, only mist curling across the road. That same night, his apprentice fell ill with fever and died before dawn. Robert swore that after the burial, the knocking stopped forever. In folklore, places themselves can hold the echo of such knocks. There are old stone manors and wind-battered cottages where locals insist that the sound still repeats at the same hour each year, usually on the anniversary of a death long forgotten. In some of these homes, the knocks have become part of the night's rhythm, like the ticking of a clock. Residents speak of hearing them faintly while drifting off to sleep, almost comforted by their predictability. It's as if the house remembers more than its inhabitants ever could. Historians, studying these accounts, often note how widespread they are. The death knock appears in Irish and Scottish lore, Scandinavian sagas, German ghost tales, even among Native American and African tribal stories, each describing nearly the same thing. 3 distinct sounds heard just before or after someone's passing. It raises the question, how could so many different cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, share the same chilling detail? Were they all imagining it? Or were they all hearing the same truth whispered through time? There are testimonies from people who swore the knock saved their lives. A story from the 1920s tells of a family in Yorkshire who heard frantic pounding on their door one night. Thinking it was a traveler in distress, they rushed outside. Moments after they left, their chimney collapsed into the room where they had been sitting. No one was at the door, but the mysterious knocking had drawn them out just in time. The villagers said it was the spirit of their late grandfather, protecting his kin from joining him too soon. The thin line between warning and doom makes the phenomenon all the more haunting. It never fully reveals its intent. Sometimes it brings comfort, other times catastrophe. The knock arrives, and what follows can be sorrow, salvation, or silence. That uncertainty is perhaps what makes it so unforgettable. Even skeptics, when faced with it, often struggle to explain what they've heard. Some try to recreate it, striking wood and plaster to mimic the sound. Yet they admit something is missing, some strange resonance, a heaviness in the air that no human hand can quite reproduce. Those who've heard it firsthand describe a strange vibration, a feeling not just in the ears, but deep in the chest, as if the body itself recognizes the sound before the mind does. In the countryside of Romania, old peasants would say that the dead sometimes knock to remind the living of unfinished promises, a vow broken, a debt unpaid, a grave unattended. The spirit would not rest until acknowledgement was given. Families who ignored the knocks would soon find mirrors cracking or windows shattering on their own, as if the house itself grew impatient. Only after the living fulfilled their forgotten duty would the sounds finally cease. The most unnerving detail is how personal the knock can feel. It doesn't sound like something that happens to a house. It happens for someone in particular. People describe it as intimate, precise, always at the right time, always meant to be heard by a specific person. Those who share the story often say, "I knew it was for me." And they mean it not with fear, but with the uneasy certainty of recognition. In the end, the knock doesn't always precede a death. Sometimes it lingers afterward, as if marking the departure rather than announcing it. Families in mourning have spoken of hearing a soft tap on the coffin during funerals or on the walls of the home in the nights following a burial. To some, it's the spirit saying farewell. To others, it's simply the house learning to live with its new silence. Whether omen, comfort, or curse, the knock remains one of humanity's oldest and eeriest mysteries. It reminds us that the unknown doesn't always scream. It sometimes whispers, softly and politely, at the door. And the hardest part isn't hearing it. It's deciding whether or not to answer. Some legends say that the death knock doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it echoes from within the listener's own mind, a sound no one else can hear, but one that feels real enough to stir the soul. In many recorded accounts, witnesses describe waking in the stillness of the night to the sharp, distinct rhythm of knocking, only to realize that no one else in the household is stirred. The sound seems to travel through the air like a message directed solely at them. And when, days later, news of a passing reaches them, they remember it. The sound that had no source. The sound that felt like someone reaching across a great distance to say goodbye. In older times, such moments were treated with reverence. People would pour a small glass of water, place it near a window, and whisper a short prayer, believing the spirit that caused the knock might be passing by, thirsty from its journey between worlds. The water was left overnight, and if it was disturbed or gone by morning, it was taken as a sign that the soul had found its way onward. Though small, these gestures reveal how deeply our ancestors believed that sound and spirit were bound together, that death was not silence, but transformation. One eerie account from the 19th century tells of a young governess who stayed in an old manor near Devon. She was awakened one stormy night by a single knock at her bedroom door. Thinking it was one of the children, she called out, but no answer came. When she opened the door, the hallway was empty. The next morning, she learned that the family matriarch, sleeping 2 floors below, had died quietly in her bed during the same hour. The servants whispered that the old woman's spirit had gone to each room of the house, gently knocking to bid farewell. In many traditions, the act of knocking holds symbolic meaning. It's the sound of transition, the moment between entry and refusal. To knock is to ask permission, to acknowledge a boundary. In ghostly folklore, that boundary is the one separating the living from the dead. When the knock comes, it's not always to frighten. It's a request, a presence seeking passage, a message that something wishes to cross from one side to the other, if only for a heartbeat. But sometimes that heartbeat never ends. There are tales where the knocking becomes endless, repeating night after night, until the listener either leaves the home or loses their sanity. In a deserted farmhouse in northern England, locals tell of a widow who ignored the nightly knocks at her door. For weeks they continued, soft at first, then louder, almost desperate. When she finally opened the door one night, she found no one there. Yet when she closed it again, the knocking started from inside. She moved away soon after, and the house fell into ruin. To this day, people walking past swear they can hear faint knocking through the rotting wood at dusk, like a hand still waiting to be answered. As centuries turned and the world grew more skeptical, belief in omens faded, but the sound never disappeared. Even in the modern age, the stories continue in quiet suburban homes, in hospitals, in nursing wards where people speak of hearing faint rhythmic taps just before a monitor flatlines. Some describe the sound as oddly peaceful, like a ritual still being performed by something ancient that refuses to be forgotten. Parapsychologists who've studied these phenomena often note how the death knock differs from other haunting sounds. It rarely accompanies poltergeist chaos or violent manifestations. Instead, it's isolated, intentional, a signal rather than an attack. To them, it represents one of the purest forms of what they call auditory apparitions, manifestations of consciousness without visual form. They theorize that in the final moments of life, the intense emotional energy of separation might project itself outward, imprinting sound into the surrounding environment. But folklore doesn't need science to make sense. It lives in the places where explanations fail. The death knock endures because it touches something deeply human, our longing to be noticed, even in death. The wish to say one last goodbye, to make one last sound before fading into silence. In that way, the knocking becomes less a warning and more a reminder that death, no matter how mysterious, is still a part of life's conversation. There's a story from New Orleans about an elderly woman who lived alone after her husband's passing. Every year, on the anniversary of his death, she'd hear 2 knocks at the same hour he'd died. Always 2. Soft, patient, unmistakable. She'd smile, whisper a greeting, and go back to bed. Neighbors thought it was her imagination until one year, when she didn't answer her door for several days. When they finally entered, they found her sitting peacefully in her chair, a faint smile on her lips. The clock beside her had stopped at that exact hour, and those who were there swore they heard 2 faint knocks before the silence settled in for good. The knock before death may never be proven or disproven, because it belongs to a realm beyond proof. Whether it's a trick of the senses or a true signal from the unseen, it leaves an impression that can't be erased. It is both frightening and strangely beautiful, a message wrapped in mystery, reminding us that the end might not be an end at all, but simply someone, somewhere, politely asking to come in. And so, when the night is quiet, when every sound has faded and the house feels heavy with stillness, listen carefully. If you ever hear it, the soft, deliberate rhythm of something knocking with no one there, don't be too quick to dismiss it. Perhaps it's nothing. Perhaps it's just the woods settling. Or perhaps, as so many before us have believed, it's the gentle hand of the beyond, reaching out one last time before the world grows silent again. Tonight we step even closer to the veil, to the moments when life and death brush against each other in whispers and faint taps. We will explore a phenomenon that has fascinated and unsettled people for centuries, the spirits that signal their own passing. These are not random hauntings or restless ghosts wandering aimlessly. These are conscious messages, a final farewell delivered through knocks, raps, and other subtle signs that someone is about to leave the world of the living behind. Across the hills and valleys of Europe, folklore tells of spirits that leave a warning before they die, sometimes appearing to family or friends miles away. In Ireland, it was said that the soul of a dying person could travel ahead of their body, reaching the home of loved ones to leave a message, a farewell, or even a warning. This spirit, called a fetch, was not feared but revered. Families who knew the signs would prepare quietly, lighting a candle, muttering prayers, and waiting for the inevitable news that would follow. To them, the presence of the fetch was a reminder that death need not arrive in silence. One story from the Scottish Highlands tells of a mother who lived alone with her daughter. One night, she awoke to the sound of 3 distinct raps on her window. Thinking it was a neighbor or perhaps a branch striking the glass, she paid little attention at first. The next morning, a letter arrived from her son, who was serving as a soldier in a distant town. He had passed away in his sleep peacefully at the exact hour the raps had sounded. The mother was not frightened, only deeply moved, believing that her son's spirit had reached her to deliver his final goodbye. Similar stories have been recounted in England, where families speak of hearing their loved one knocking at the door or a window the moment they passed away elsewhere. These signals were often precise: 3 taps, a single tap, or even a rhythmic pattern that matched the heartbeat of the dying person. Some believed that this was a way for the spirit to confirm that life was leaving, that everything was as it should be. Others saw it as a plea, a gentle request for attention, for love, before moving on. The fetch is not always tied to familial bonds. In certain German traditions, a fetch might appear as a shadowy double of the dying person, moving silently through their home to leave a final signal. Sometimes it was heard in the form of faint footsteps, soft whispers, or the subtle rattling of objects. These were not meant to frighten, but to communicate. People who experienced these signs often described a profound calm, as if the world itself had paused to honor the transition. There are accounts from the Appalachian region in America where families reported hearing faint rapping on doors or walls, sometimes even before a telegram arrived with news of a death miles away. Elders would tell children that these sounds were the spirits of their own kin, coming back one last time to make themselves known. The message was clear. Someone you love has departed, but they have reached out to you first, offering a moment of connection between life and death. Hospitals and hospices have their own versions of these tales in modern times. Nurses sometimes report hearing a series of knocks or raps in the rooms of patients who are quietly passing away. The sound is subtle, almost gentle, enough to be dismissed as creaking walls, yet those who witness it swear it is deliberate, as though the departing soul is acknowledging its own passage and reaching out to the living one last time. Families who hear these signals often describe them as comforting, a reminder that death is not abrupt or cruel, but thoughtful in its own way. In Celtic lore, the spirits that signal their own passing are often tied to the natural rhythms of life. Death is not seen as a final, sudden act, but as a continuation of the cycle, where energy and consciousness are respected even in departure. The knock, the tap, the shadowy visit, is a ritual of transition, a moment of grace that allows the living to prepare emotionally, spiritually, and mentally for what is to come. Stories from Japan recount similar phenomena, where family members hear soft raps or footsteps in the night before a loved one passes. These events are interpreted as the spirit saying goodbye, offering reassurance to those left behind. In some cases, shrines were prepared, incense lit, and prayers whispered in response to these sounds, honoring the departing presence. The act of signaling before death is not viewed as a curse or an omen of misfortune, but as an extension of care and love, a final act of connection between worlds. Even skeptics who have studied these occurrences note a pattern. The sounds, the raps, and the footsteps are not chaotic or random. They are measured, intentional, and often occur in a manner consistent with the moment of passing. This consistency across cultures and centuries suggests a universal human experience, one that transcends superstition and enters the realm of something deeper, something that touches on the very nature of life and death. There are tales of friends and distant relatives hearing these signals hours or even days before receiving word of a death. In some traditions, the rapping might be accompanied by other subtle signs, a sudden chill in the room, a flicker of candlelight, or the sensation of being watched. The combination of these signals creates a heightened awareness, a sense that something profound is occurring just beyond the reach of the senses. The living are being granted a glimpse, a fleeting acknowledgement of the moment when a soul begins its journey beyond the physical world. In the hills of Wales, a family once recounted hearing a rhythmic tapping from the ceiling of their home, coinciding precisely with the time that their cousin, living in another town, had quietly passed in his sleep. They described it not as frightening, but as a serene and solemn occurrence, a bridge between the living and the dead that demanded attention yet offered solace. The experience left them with a sense of awe, a recognition that even in the absence of sight, the bonds between the living and dying could manifest in sound. In many cultures, the concept of the fetch, or pre-death spirit, serves as a reminder that death is not always sudden or invisible. It is a passage, sometimes announced with care, sometimes marked with a signature only those attuned to it can recognize. The messages are subtle, but unmistakable to those who have experienced them. A soft tap, a rhythmic knock, a fleeting shadow. all signs that a life is concluding, but not without a final word, a final gesture to those still left in the world of the living. The spirits that signal their own passing remind us that death is, in many ways, a conversation. It is not a theft of life, but a continuation of connection, one last echo that reaches across the boundary of the unknown. Those who hear it often describe a mixture of sorrow and comfort, a profound awareness of mortality tempered by the intimacy of the final signal. These sounds, these signs are proof that even in departure, there can be care, there can be acknowledgement, and there can be a silent, dignified grace. There are stories where the signals of a departing spirit are so precise that they almost seem choreographed. In a small village in Brittany, a woman named Elodie reported hearing 3 distinct knocks at her bedroom door one quiet evening. She did not answer immediately, sensing a weight in the air. Hours later, she received word that her father, living in another town, had passed away at the exact time she had heard the knocks. Elodie was struck not by fear, but by a sense of connection that defied distance. The sound had traversed miles, transcending walls and time, carrying with it a message of farewell and presence. In the Appalachian Mountains, families speak of similar experiences. There, the phenomenon is often tied to the tradition of watching the dying. Relatives would sit quietly in a room for days, listening for subtle sounds, a faint rapping on a window, the creak of a floorboard, even the rustle of fabric in an empty room. These signs were believed to be the dying person's way of signaling that they were aware of the loved ones who had come to say goodbye. Unlike the death knock that heralds someone else's passing, this form of communication is intimate, personal, and deliberate, meant only for those who have shared the life of the departing. Hospitals and nursing homes have also provided modern accounts of this strange phenomenon. Nurses and caregivers describe hearing faint raps, taps, or even whispers in rooms where patients are quietly passing. One nurse recounted a night when she heard 3 knocks coming from an empty corner of a hospice ward. Moments later, a patient she had been attending passed away peacefully. Many staff members who have heard these sounds describe them as gentle, almost tender, as if the departing soul is extending a hand in farewell before leaving the world behind. In some cases, the signs are even more intricate. Folklore from Germany speaks of the Todklopfen, or death knocking, where spirits communicate in a patterned rhythm unique to the individual. Families could recognize the pattern immediately, understanding it as a personal farewell. The sound was never menacing. Instead, it carried a strange comfort and assurance that the transition from life to death was orderly, purposeful, and acknowledged. This echoes the universal theme across cultures, that death is not merely an ending, but a passage marked with care and attention. Stories of distant signals are particularly fascinating. There are accounts of family members hearing a knock, a tap, or even a bell-like tone in their own homes while their loved ones pass away elsewhere. In Japan, some families speak of pre-death sounds, subtle noises that occur precisely at the moment of passing. These sounds may include knocks on doors or walls, the clatter of objects, or the faint whisper of a familiar voice. The living are often left with a lingering sense of awe, having been allowed a glimpse into a moment that is normally hidden from human perception. The fetch, or pre-death spirit, is sometimes seen as an extension of the dying person's consciousness. It appears not out of malice or restlessness, but out of intention. There are tales where the fetch was even visible, a shadowy outline of a person in familiar clothing, walking quietly through the home, stopping briefly to nod or gesture toward loved ones. In other instances, the fetch is purely auditory, a sequence of knocks, footsteps, or soft taps. The form it takes may depend on the observer's sensitivity or cultural background, But the purpose remains the same: to signal the impending transition and to offer a final, intangible connection. Some accounts are almost ritualistic in their precision. A Welsh family once described a series of rhythmic taps on a window that lasted exactly 3 minutes, followed by a silence so complete it seemed unnatural. Hours later, a letter arrived reporting the death of a distant cousin. The family believed the cousin's spirit had traveled across space to offer a final farewell, and that the precise rhythm of the tapping was a signature of their soul, recognizable only to those attuned to it. These stories suggest a form of communication that transcends the limitations of the physical world, a language made of sound, intent, and presence. In Native American traditions, similar phenomena are described, though often tied to natural elements. Spirits of the dying may be accompanied by sounds that mimic the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, or the distant drumming of a bird's wings. These subtle signals are interpreted as guidance, reassurance, and confirmation that the soul is moving along the correct path. Families who recognize the sounds treat them with respect, seeing them as a bridge between the living and the departed rather than a cause for alarm. Even in the modern world, where science dominates explanations, the phenomenon persists. People who experience these signals often describe them as deeply moving rather than frightening. The sounds may arrive as a single knock, a series of raps, or even an unidentifiable hum. What matters is the intention perceived behind the sound, the unmistakable presence of consciousness trying to communicate across the divide. These are not random noises, nor are they figments of imagination. They carry the weight of farewell, recognition, and closure. The spirits that signal their own passing remind us that death is rarely sudden in folklore. It is a process, acknowledged and respected by both the living and the departing. The knocks, taps, and raps are part of a dialogue that stretches across time and space, linking the hearts of those who remain with the souls who leave. It is a phenomenon that evokes wonder, a reminder that even in death, there is a desire to be seen, to be heard, and to be remembered. In many of these tales, the signals of a departing spirit are as much about reassurance as they are about announcement. Families often describe a sense of calm or certainty when the knocks or raps occur. It is as though the spirit is not only acknowledging its own passing, but also comforting those left behind. In the Scottish Highlands, there is a story of a farmer whose wife heard gentle tapping on the bedroom wall the night her husband died in a distant field. She described the sound as deliberate, measured, almost like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Though she was filled with sorrow, she also felt a strange peace, as though her husband's spirit had traveled ahead to tell her he was at rest. Similar phenomena appear in Ireland, where the concept of the fetch is strongest. Accounts from rural villages recount family members waking to soft, unmistakable raps at doors or windows, sometimes accompanied by the faint scent of familiar perfumes or tobacco. These subtle touches are believed to be the departing soul's way of leaving a part of itself behind, creating a bridge between the worlds. Some families would even speak to the presence aloud, offering blessings and farewells, and report that the sound would gently fade afterward. Even in England, folklore preserves stories of pre-death signals that are highly personal. One tale tells of a young woman whose brother, living far away, had been ill for months. She was awakened one night by 3 deliberate raps against her window pane. Though hesitant at first, she recognized the pattern as a message only he could give. Within hours, she received word that he had passed, and she was struck by the sense that he had reached out across the distance to ensure she was aware, giving her the opportunity to grieve while he still existed in some form. In some cultures, these pre-death signals are treated with ritualistic respect. In parts of Japan, families may light incense or leave small offerings when they hear unexplained knocks or raps. The sound is seen as a form of communication, a respectful way for the departing spirit to notify the living of their transition. In doing so, the living honor the presence of the spirit, creating a quiet ceremony in which both life and death are acknowledged. These practices highlight the profound cultural understanding that the act of leaving the world is rarely abrupt, and that recognition and connection remain central even in final moments. Modern hospitals and hospice care facilities have their own eerie versions of these experiences. Nurses recount hearing faint raps or knocks in the rooms of patients who are quietly passing. One nurse described hearing 3 measured taps coming from a corner where no patient remained awake, and just minutes later, the monitor indicated that the patient's heartbeat had stopped. Others report the same phenomenon, noting that the sound often occurs at the exact time the patient passes, as if the soul has chosen a way to make itself known to the living, leaving a moment of recognition before fully departing. There are also accounts where the signals of a dying spirit are experienced by people who are not immediate family members. A woman in the American South reported hearing persistent knocking in her house the night her cousin, hundreds of miles away, died unexpectedly. The pattern of the knocks was unmistakable, a rhythm she felt she could recognize as belonging uniquely to her cousin. These distant signals suggest that the bond between the living and dying is not constrained by geography, and that a spirit's intent can transcend both distance and physical barriers to reach those it wishes to communicate with. In Germany, folklore preserves the tradition of Todklopfen, where the sounds of a departing soul are often rhythmic and patterned, uniquely tailored to the individual. Families knew how to interpret these subtle messages, which often arrived before death had occurred. Unlike random creaks or unexplainable noises, Todkalon had a distinct cadence, a musical quality that indicated a soul moving gently between worlds. To hear it was to witness a moment of transition, a final connection that reminded the living that life and death are deeply intertwined. Some accounts describe more dramatic manifestations. A tale from Wales tells of a woman who, while sleeping, felt a gentle weight on her bed, accompanied by soft knocking on the nearby wall. She awoke to find herself alone, but hours later, her brother, living in another town, passed quietly in his sleep. Many who experienced these phenomena emphasize that the moments are not frightening, but solemn and intimate. The signal is intended to communicate, not terrify. It is a message wrapped in the stillness of night, a final acknowledgement that life has ended and yet continues in memory and spirit. Across cultures, these phenomena share striking similarities. Measured knocks, patterned raps, soft footsteps, or fleeting whispers, all coinciding with moments of death. They are often subtle, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakably present to those attuned to them. Whether the sounds are spiritual, psychological, or a mix of both, they carry meaning. They represent an awareness of departure, a gesture of connection, and, in many cases, an expression of care from the departing soul toward those left behind. The spirits that signal their own passing are a reminder that death is rarely abrupt in the perception of the living. It is a process, sometimes deliberate, sometimes tender, always meaningful. The subtle signals, the delicate raps, and the rhythmic knocks are more than sounds. They are messages of acknowledgement, threads of connection woven between the living and the dying. They remind us that even as life ends, consciousness can reach out, offering one last word, one last gesture, one last echo of presence. In many accounts, the signals of a departing spirit are described as profoundly personal, tailored to the individual who receives them. They are not random noises that happen to occur at the right moment. They are deliberate, intentional, and recognizable. In some traditions, the rhythm of a knock or the pattern of taps is so unique that the living know immediately who it represents. In Ireland, these subtle signals are often connected to the concept of ancestral care, where the departing soul reaches out not only to family, but also to friends and community, ensuring that its passing is acknowledged and honored. One poignant story comes from a small village in Devon, England, where a young woman named Clara lived alone. One night she was awakened by 3 soft taps on her window pane. The sound was measured, distinct, and carried a strange sense of familiarity. She hesitated before opening the window, uncertain of its source. Later that morning, she received news that her older brother, who had been ill in a nearby town, had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Clara was struck by the timing and the precision of the taps, feeling a connection that transcended the miles separating them. To her, the signal was not frightening, but a final gesture of love, a quiet acknowledgement that he had left this world while still reaching out to her. Stories like Clara's appear throughout Europe and North America. Families in the Appalachian Mountains often recount instances where a loved one's death is preceded by faint raps on doors or windows, footsteps in empty hallways, or even the sound of furniture shifting in a room where no one resides. These occurrences are treated with reverence, understood as messages from those departing, meant to prepare the living for the inevitable. It is a moment of transition, not of terror, a way for the living to participate in the final stages of a life they cherished. In hospitals and hospice care facilities, similar phenomena are observed. Nurses and caregivers report hearing subtle knocks, raps, or taps in the rooms of patients who are quietly passing. Often these sounds coincide exactly with the moment the patient takes their last breath. Many staff members interpret this as the patient's way of acknowledging the world around them, a final signal to the living that they are moving on. These experiences are rarely disturbing. Rather, they are described as peaceful, solemn, and even comforting, offering a quiet ceremony of recognition without the need for words. The concept of a pre-death signal extends into folklore from Germany, where the Todklopfen, or death knocking, was a well-documented tradition. In these stories, the sound of the dying person's spirit was often rhythmic and patterned, unique to each individual. Families learned to recognize these signals and interpreted them as personal messages from the departing soul. The Todklopfen was not a warning of fear or misfortune. It was a communication of presence, an acknowledgement that life was drawing to a close and that those left behind should prepare emotionally and spiritually for the transition. Similarly, in Japan, families speak of pre-death signals known as shinigami communications, subtle sounds or touches that occur just before a loved one passes. These may include faint knocking, a sudden chill, or even the sensation of a gentle brush of air. In response, families often perform quiet rituals, lighting incense or offering small gestures of respect, acknowledging the presence of the departing spirit and honoring the natural order of life and death. These practices reflect a cultural understanding that death is not abrupt, but a gradual passage, punctuated by subtle signals that remind the living of the connections that endure beyond the physical world. Some accounts extend even to distant premonitions. People have reported hearing the knocking or rapping of a loved one who is far away, sometimes hundreds of miles, at the exact moment of their passing. These distant signals defy conventional understanding, suggesting that the bonds between the living and the dying are not limited by geography or physical presence. In some cases, the pattern of the knocks is so specific that it is immediately identifiable, a signature of the soul leaving its body yet reaching across space to ensure that someone knows they are departing. Across cultures, centuries, and continents, certain patterns remain remarkably consistent. Measured, deliberate knocks, rhythmic, recognizable raps, gentle footsteps, or faint, fleeting sounds. They are often accompanied by subtle environmental cues, a flicker of candlelight, a sudden chill, or a faint scent associated with the departed. These signals serve as reminders that death is not merely an ending, but a transition, one that can be marked with intention, grace, and the quiet acknowledgement of those left behind. The spirits that signal their own passing leave the living with a profound awareness of mortality, tempered by the intimacy of connection. They remind us that even as life ends, consciousness can reach out, leaving a final imprint that is at once comforting, solemn, and unforgettable. They are not malevolent or frightening. They are messengers, bridging the gap between worlds, offering one last chance for recognition, farewell, and love. In the quiet of the night, when the world feels still and every sound carries weight, it is possible to imagine such moments unfolding. The soft tap at the window, the rhythmic knock on the door, the gentle creak of a floorboard, all might be more than coincidence. They may be the final delicate signals of a soul acknowledging its own departure, ensuring that it is seen, heard, and remembered. These stories endure because they touch a deep universal truth. The living and the dying are never fully separate. Even in passing, there is connection, communication, and care. The signals of departing spirits remind us that death is not abrupt or careless. It is thoughtful, intentional, and in many ways profoundly human. The final taps and knocks are echoes of love, threads of presence woven between worlds, and timeless messages that death, though inevitable, is never truly silent. Tonight we turn our attention to a phenomenon that often intertwines with the mysterious knocks and raps we've explored, the Poltergeist Connection. Unlike the gentle signals of a spirit signaling its own passing, poltergeists are restless, unpredictable, and often mischievous. Yet they share a fascinating link with the world of tapping and knocking, blurring the lines between playful disturbance and ominous warning. In this segment, we will explore the strange relationship between poltergeists and the echoes of the dead, the way some spirits seem to reach out with both message and mischief, and the chilling stories that arise when the two converge. Poltergeists have been documented across cultures for centuries, and while the term is German in origin, meaning noisy ghost, the phenomenon itself is universal. Unlike the measured raps of a fetch or a death-knocking spirit, poltergeist activity is often loud, chaotic, and startling. Objects may move on their own, furniture can be overturned, and persistent knocking may occur on walls, doors, or ceilings. The link to death and the afterlife becomes clear when these disturbances are concentrated around young people, households experiencing grief, or locations with a history of tragedy. Scholars and folklorists alike have noted that the poltergeist often acts as a conduit, a manifestation of emotional energy that can produce sound in ways eerily similar to the signals of passing spirits. In England during the 17th century, accounts of poltergeist activity often described persistent knocking or tapping that seemed to target individuals within a household. One famous case involved a family in Lancashire, where doors, windows, and even wooden beams would erupt with sudden raps and thuds. The sounds often followed patterns, occurring in sequences that seemed almost intentional, as if the unseen presence were attempting to communicate. Sometimes, the activity coincided with moments of tension or emotional upheaval, leading some to speculate that poltergeists were not entirely autonomous spirits, but rather manifestations of psychic energy amplified by human stress and grief. Yet there are cases where poltergeist activity appears deeply intertwined with death. Folklore suggests that restless spirits, those who have not fully passed or who linger due to unfinished business, may express themselves through poltergeist-like disturbances, knocks and raps, which in other contexts serve as a gentle signal of farewell, can here become louder, more insistent, and even menacing. A haunting in northern Germany described a widow hearing repeated raps each night following the sudden death of her husband. The knocks were relentless, bouncing from walls to ceiling, yet those familiar with local customs interpreted the sounds as the soul of her husband attempting to make his presence known, to communicate unresolved matters, or to ensure that his departure was acknowledged. The poltergeist's unpredictable nature does not always mean danger, though. In some tales, the knocking is accompanied by a kind of mischievous playfulness. In Victorian England, there were reports of poltergeist activity centered around children in orphanages or schools. The knocks would follow specific individuals, often coinciding with emotional stress, minor frustrations, or fear. Some of these instances mirror the more familiar death-knocking phenomena, though with a different emotional tone. The sounds may be startling, but they are rarely intended to harm. Instead, they reflect an energy that has yet to find balance, sometimes tied to the presence of the living, sometimes linked to spirits lingering in the home. In the United States, poltergeist phenomena have been documented since colonial times. Families reported unexplained knocks, raps, and crashes in homes where tragedy had struck, particularly following untimely deaths. One notable account comes from a farmhouse in New England, where a series of mysterious knocks began after the sudden death of a teenage boy. Windows rattled, doors thumped, and objects moved inexplicably. Locals speculated that the boy's spirit was trying to communicate, though in a way that was louder and more erratic than the quiet, deliberate signals of passing spirits. Psychologists and parapsychologists later suggested that the activity could be linked to residual emotional energy, amplified by grief and trauma. Poltergeist activity often blurs the line between the spiritual and the psychological. While some researchers view the phenomenon as evidence of restless spirits, others consider it a physical manifestation of human emotions, particularly those of adolescents or individuals under extreme stress. The uncanny part is that the sounds produced, knocks, raps, and taps, so closely mirror those associated with signals of death or premonitions. This overlap suggests a shared mechanism, whether spiritual or psychological, in which unseen forces interact with the physical world through sound, creating a bridge between what is felt and what is heard. Across cultures, poltergeists are often described as noisy, yet purposeful. In Japan, they are sometimes called yurei raps, manifestations of spirits who are unsettled and seek acknowledgement. These sounds can occur in patterns, almost conversational in their repetition, echoing the signaling behavior of dying or departed souls. In African traditions, similar disturbances are associated with spirits who have grievances or warnings to convey. In every culture, the act of knocking, rapping, or tapping becomes a language, a sound through which spirits communicate, whether to warn, to comfort, or to demand recognition. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Poltergeist Connection is how it can transform ordinary spaces into stages for these sounds. Wooden floors, plaster walls, and old doors seem particularly responsive, amplifying the subtle vibrations of unseen forces. Residents often describe the experience as both terrifying and fascinating, a mixture of fear and awe. In many instances, the disturbances coincide with deaths, illnesses, or significant life events, suggesting a deep link between emotional energy, loss, and the ability of unseen forces to manifest audibly in the world of the living. The Poltergeist Connection challenges our understanding of knocking as a signal of death. While death knocks are measured and deliberate, Poltergeist sounds are erratic and unpredictable, yet they often share a core purpose: communication. Whether the source is a restless human spirit, residual energy, or something else entirely, the noises act as a bridge, linking the living with what lies beyond. Sometimes the message is subtle, sometimes insistent, but it is always a reminder that the boundary between the physical and spiritual world is not as solid as it appears. Poltergeists are often described as catalysts, drawing the hidden energy of a household into audible and sometimes visible manifestations. In many documented cases, the intensity of the knocking or rapping seems to fluctuate with the emotional atmosphere of the home. In one case from northern England, a family experienced a series of loud, erratic knocks following the sudden death of a matriarch. Windows rattled, dishes shifted, and doors thudded repeatedly. Neighbors reported nothing unusual, yet inside the house, the disturbances were unmistakable. The family believed that the deceased spirit was expressing frustration and urgency, using the energy left in the home to make its presence known. Poltergeist activity does not always coincide with death, but it often amplifies pre-existing grief or emotional tension. In Victorian-era accounts, schools and orphanages were hotbeds of reported phenomena. Children, in states of anxiety or fear, would inadvertently channel psychic energy into the environment, producing knocking sounds, slamming doors, or floating objects. While not inherently sinister, these occurrences were often interpreted as signs of unsettled spirits, especially when combined with knowledge of past deaths or tragedies in the area. The overlap between human emotion and poltergeist activity complicates our understanding, blurring the line between natural explanation and supernatural intervention. In Germany, Todklopfen, the traditional death-knocking spirit, is sometimes associated with poltergeist activity. When grief, fear, or unresolved emotions are involved, the knocking can become louder, more persistent, and even move from place to place within a home. Families would often interpret this as the spirit demanding acknowledgement, insisting that the living bear witness to the transition. Unlike the gentle, measured knocks of a fetch, poltergeist-related signals carry a sense of urgency. They act as reminders that the departed presence still lingers, that energy and intention remain, and that recognition is essential before peace can be achieved. The Poltergeist Connection also raises questions about intent. Some researchers suggest that poltergeist sounds are not purely the actions of restless spirits, but rather a form of communication channeled through residual energy in the environment. In houses with a history of death, trauma, or intense emotional events, the energy left behind may create the conditions for audible manifestations, taps, knocks, or rhythmic sounds that mirror those associated with spirits, signaling their own passing. In this sense, poltergeists may act as amplifiers, transforming faint, subtle echoes of a departing soul into dramatic, physical disturbances. One particularly chilling account comes from a farmhouse in New England, where a young boy had recently passed away. Following his death, the family began experiencing a series of persistent knocks throughout the house. At first, they assumed it was settling wood or the wind, but the patterns became unmistakable. Doors, floors, and ceilings all reverberated with deliberate raps, often coinciding with the time of the boy's passing. Neighbors reported nothing, suggesting that the disturbances were contained entirely within the emotional and energetic environment of the home. Experts later theorized that the boy's residual energy, combined with the grief of his family, had generated poltergeist-like activity that bridged the boundary between life and death. Poltergeists also have a way of communicating specific messages through knocking. In many reports, the sounds occur in discernible patterns, almost like a code. Families have described sequences of 3 taps, 5 taps, or irregular rhythms that feel intentional. In some cases, these patterns align with prior knowledge of the deceased's habits or personality, reinforcing the idea that the activity is purposeful. The notion that the dead, or forces tied to them, can manipulate sound in order to communicate adds a layer of complexity to the traditional concept of the death knock. It suggests not just a signal of passing, but an ongoing dialogue between the living and those who have departed. Across cultures, poltergeist phenomena share striking similarities, despite differing beliefs and folklore. In Japan, the restless spirits known as yurei can produce knocking or rapping sounds when unsettled or seeking attention. In African and Caribbean traditions, similar disturbances are attributed to ancestral spirits expressing their displeasure or requesting acknowledgement. In every culture, there is a recognition that sound, knocking, tapping, or rapping, is a powerful medium for bridging the gap between the physical world and the spiritual. The poltergeist, whether mischievous or purposeful, uses this medium to make itself known, sometimes echoing the subtle signals of a soul departing, sometimes demanding recognition in a far more insistent way. Even in modern urban settings, poltergeist-like disturbances continue to be reported. Apartment dwellers, office workers, and hotel guests have all described hearing unexplained knocks, raps, or thuds, often coinciding with moments of stress, grief, or loss. These contemporary experiences suggest that the connection between poltergeists and the signals of the dead is not confined to old houses or rural landscapes. It is a phenomenon that transcends time and place, reminding us that the boundary between the living and the spiritual is porous, and that sound remains one of the most intimate ways in which the unseen communicates. The Poltergeist Connection becomes even more compelling when we consider the emotional and psychological dimensions of these disturbances. Unlike the quiet, deliberate taps of a departing spirit, poltergeist activity often escalates in intensity, responding to the environment around it. Homes filled with grief, tension, or unresolved conflict seem particularly susceptible. In these cases, the knocking and rapping are not random, but appear to follow a rhythm dictated by the emotions of the living. Researchers and folklorists have long speculated that the poltergeist acts as a mirror reflecting the unseen stresses and unspoken sorrows of a household, while simultaneously asserting its own presence. In one chilling account from a Victorian-era boarding house in London, the lodgers reported repeated heavy knocking on walls and doors that seemed to follow no human pattern. The activity intensified during arguments between residents and subsided when harmony returned. Yet, what made the phenomenon extraordinary was that the knocks coincided with news of a distant relative's death. Families interpreted these dual signals as a merging of energies, the poltergeists amplifying the emotional resonance of grief, while also echoing the subtle knock of a departing soul, creating a layered message that was both chaotic and meaningful. Poltergeists are also known for targeting specific individuals, creating an intimate yet unsettling interaction. In a documented case from New England, a widow began hearing insistent knocks on her bedroom walls after the death of her husband. The knocks followed her from room to room, increasing in frequency when she attempted to ignore them and ceasing when she acknowledged them. Scholars suggest that this behavior mirrors the same intent seen in traditional death signal, a deliberate effort to communicate, to ensure that the living recognize the presence of the departed. The difference lies in intensity and unpredictability, where the poltergeist turns subtle signals into active, attention-demanding phenomena. Across Europe, folklore provides numerous examples of poltergeist activity emerging around death or tragedy. In Germany, the Todklopfen tradition merges naturally with poltergeist manifestations. The knocking may begin softly, in patterns associated with the individual who has passed and gradually increase in volume or intensity, particularly if the household is experiencing emotional turbulence. Families reported that acknowledgement and ritual often calmed the activity, suggesting that poltergeists, like their quieter counterparts, seek recognition and closure. In Japan, the yurei, the restless spirits, demonstrate a similar pattern. While their manifestations are often subtle, involving knocks or the rustling of objects, they can escalate if ignored. Families attuned to the cultural significance of these disturbances often respond with small rituals, offerings, or prayers. The interaction between the living and these unseen presences transforms the knocking into a form of dialogue, where acknowledgement becomes a key factor in resolving unrest. This highlights a common thread across cultures. Whether through poltergeist activity or the signals of a dying spirit, the sounds serve as a bridge, a means of connection and communication that cannot be dismissed. One of the most perplexing aspects of the Poltergeist Connection is its unpredictability. Unlike the orderly, deliberate taps of a fetch or a death-knocking spirit, poltergeist manifestations are erratic, often occurring at odd hours or in places where physical causes seem impossible. Yet, even in their chaotic behavior, there is often an underlying pattern, repetition of knocks, rhythmic sequences, or timing that aligns with specific emotional states or events. This interplay between chaos and pattern mirrors the human experience of grief and loss, suggesting that poltergeists may serve as a conduit for emotional energy, translating intangible sorrow into audible, perceptible signals. Some accounts even describe the poltergeist as acting in concert with death itself. In a farmhouse in Pennsylvania, a family experienced sustained poltergeist activity following the death of a young woman. Doors slammed, furniture shifted, and walls echoed with repeated raps. Witnesses later noted that the knocking seemed to mark moments of reflection or remembrance, almost as if the activity were timed to coincide with specific memories of the deceased. Here, the poltergeist functions as both messenger and reminder, a living echo of loss that merges the chaotic energy of unresolved emotion with the subtle signals of death that we have explored in earlier segments. Poltergeist activity also appears in the modern world, in apartments, offices, and urban dwellings, suggesting that these phenomena are not confined to old houses or rural landscapes. Reports of inexplicable knocks, thuds, and raps continue, often occurring during moments of personal stress or after the loss of a loved one. In these cases, the sounds may mimic those of a departing spirit, raising questions about the overlap between poltergeist manifestations and the pre-death signals that have been observed for centuries. Whether rooted in residual energy, spiritual intent, or a combination of both, the poltergeist's ability to produce sound reinforces the enduring power of knocking as a medium for connection across the boundaries of life and death. In summary, the Poltergeist Connection highlights the intricate interplay between human emotion, residual energy, and the presence of the unseen. These manifestations, ranging from subtle taps to forceful knocks, demonstrate that sound serves as one of the most accessible and compelling ways for spirits, whether restless or intentional, to communicate. The poltergeist may act as amplifier, messenger, or mischief maker, but at its core, it reminds us of the same truth we have seen in death signal. Even in the absence of physical presence, the living and the dead remain connected through sound, awareness, and attention. Poltergeists often seem to exist in a liminal space, bridging the living and the dead, the physical and the spiritual. Unlike the subtle, measured signals of passing spirits, they announce themselves with vigor, sometimes startling the living into awareness, yet often carrying a message beneath the noise. In a farmhouse in Yorkshire, England, A family reported incessant knocking following the death of their patriarch. Doors and windows rattled in patterns that seemed intentional, almost conversational. The family noticed that the intensity of the knocking would increase during moments of reflection or remembrance, suggesting that the poltergeist was responding not merely to presence, but to attention, memory, and emotional energy. Interestingly, poltergeists have a peculiar relationship with human perception. Those who are sensitive to the spiritual world often report more nuanced experiences. A tap that coincides with a memory, a sequence of raps that mimics a heartbeat, or the sudden movement of objects, just as someone recalls a departed loved one. In this sense, poltergeists may function as translators of emotion into sound and movement, conveying messages that are both tactile and audible. They amplify not only the grief or unrest present in a household, but also the lingering presence of those who have passed, creating a dialogue that is part spectral, part psychological, and deeply intimate. In Germany, the Todkavfen tradition offers a fascinating insight into the overlap between poltergeist activity and signals of death. Families would recognize patterns of knocking that corresponded to a specific individual, often arriving shortly before or after their passing. When the activity intensified, it was frequently attributed to residual emotional energy manifesting as poltergeist activity. These sounds were not seen as chaotic or meaningless. Instead, they were interpreted as a language of presence and departure. The poltergeist in this framework becomes both messenger and herald, merging the noise of the living world with the signals of the spiritual realm. Poltergeists can also act as intermediaries, conveying messages from the departed to the living. In a well-documented case from Massachusetts, a family experienced repeated rhythmic knocks following the death of a young child. Neighbors and visitors reported no unusual activity, yet within the house, the knocking would move from room to room, aligning with the locations where family members were most emotionally engaged. The sound seemed to follow them, responding to acknowledgement or ignoring alike. Parapsychologists later suggested that the poltergeist might have been channeling the residual energy of the child's spirit, transforming grief and memory into audible signals that could be perceived, interpreted, and ultimately understood. Across cultures, the connection between poltergeists and death is consistently evident. In Japan, uri disturbances, manifesting as knocks, taps, or movement of objects, often coincide with moments of mourning or the passing of a loved one. Families respond with rituals, offerings, or prayers, acknowledging the presence of the unseen while attempting to restore balance. Similarly, in African and Caribbean traditions, spirits associated with loss or unresolved emotion are believed to communicate through sound and movement, using the poltergeist as a vehicle for expression. In every instance, the activity is tied to recognition. The living must perceive, acknowledge, and sometimes respond to the disturbance for resolution to occur. Poltergeists also demonstrate that the physical environment plays a significant role in these phenomena. Wooden floors, plaster walls, old doors, and creaking ceilings act as natural amplifiers, allowing subtle energy to manifest audibly. In haunted houses across Europe and North America, investigators have noted that the architecture itself seemed to participate in the phenomena, resonating with the energy and amplifying the signals. This creates an eerie synergy between environment and entity, where the poltergeist becomes a conduit through which grief, emotion, and spiritual presence are expressed in tangible ways. Modern accounts continue to reflect the enduring nature of the Poltergeist Connection. Apartment dwellers, office workers, and hotel guests often report unexplained knocks, raps, and thuds during moments of stress, grief, or after hearing news of a death. Even in urban landscapes, Where traditional folklore may seem distant, the phenomena persist, suggesting that poltergeist activity is not bound by geography, culture, or time. The sounds remain a medium of communication, bridging unseen energy with the living world, echoing the timeless patterns of departure, connection, and acknowledgement. In essence, the Poltergeist Connection reminds us that sound is one of the most profound ways in which the unseen communicates. Whether gentle or insistent, erratic or patterned, knocking serves as a bridge between realms. Poltergeists may amplify residual energy, translate emotion into auditory signals, or act as intermediaries for departing souls. Yet at their core, they are deeply intertwined with the human experience of grief, memory, and presence. They challenge our understanding of the boundaries between life and death, the physical and spiritual, showing that even chaos can carry meaning, and that every knock may hold a story waiting to be heard. Poltergeists, with their unpredictable energy and intimate connection to human emotion, occupy a unique space in the study of the unexplained. They demonstrate that the signals of the departed are not always quiet, measured, or easily interpreted. Sometimes they manifest as a restless force, insistent and tangible, demanding acknowledgement while simultaneously comforting, warning, or guiding. The act of knocking, whether soft or violent, deliberate or erratic, persists across centuries and cultures as one of the most immediate ways the unseen reaches out. It is a reminder that even in the chaotic, the mysterious, and the frightening, there exists a thread of communication that links the living with the dead, emotion with energy, and the world of the seen with the world of the unseen. In this segment, we explore death knocks across cultures and how different societies have interpreted these eerie signals. Throughout history, knocking, rapping, or tapping has often been more than a mysterious noise. It has carried deep symbolic and spiritual significance. From Europe to Asia, from ancient times to modern folklore, these sounds are woven into beliefs about death, transition, and the unseen. Understanding how cultures interpret these signals gives us insight into the universal human fascination with the boundary between life and death. In Scotland, the phenomenon of the fetch is one of the most well-documented examples of pre-death signals. A fetch is considered an apparition or spirit that appears before the death of an individual. Often it is accompanied by knocking, rapping, or other audible signs. Families would report hearing a series of measured knocks against doors, windows, or walls, which were interpreted as messages from the impending spirit. The knocking served as a warning, a gentle acknowledgement, and sometimes as a comforting presence. The fetch demonstrates that in Scottish folklore, death is not a sudden, unannounced event. It is a process signaled by both visual and auditory cues, giving the living a chance to prepare emotionally and spiritually. Ireland offers a similar tradition, where death knocking is closely tied to ancestral spirits. In rural villages, families recount tales of raps at doors, windows, and furniture that occur shortly before a loved one's passing. These sounds are seen as intentional messages, often reflecting the personality or habits of the individual who is about to die. For example, a loved one might hear 3 sharp knocks at midnight, which corresponds to a recurring motif in Irish folklore for death announcements. The signals are rarely frightening. Rather, they are understood as a natural part of the transition between life and death, connecting the living with the spiritual presence of their ancestors. In Germany, the Todklopfen tradition has been recorded for centuries. Todklopfen literally translates to death knocking, and it refers to the practice of hearing raps or knocks associated with someone's imminent passing. Families would often recognize patterns of knocking that corresponded to specific individuals. The signals could occur at any time, often at night, and sometimes coincided with the emotional state of the household. Tutkafen was considered an important cultural signal not to be ignored. Many families would light candles, say prayers, or perform small rituals in acknowledgement of the sound, believing that doing so would guide the departing soul safely into the next world. In England, similar accounts appear throughout history. Particularly in rural areas, reports of death knocks often coincide with the passing of elders or significant community members. The knocking was interpreted as both a warning and a final message, sometimes rhythmic, sometimes irregular, but always imbued with meaning. Some believed that the knocks reflected the personality of the deceased, with strong or sharp taps associated with more assertive individuals, and softer, measured knocks with gentle spirits. In all cases, the sound was not merely a noise, but a form of communication, a ritualistic bridge between the living and the dead. Japanese culture offers a unique perspective on pre-death signals. Yurai, or restless spirits, are often associated with subtle knocking or tapping phenomena. While not always interpreted as signs of imminent death, these sounds are understood to indicate the presence of a spirit in need of acknowledgement or closure. Families may perform quiet rituals such as lighting incense or offering small tokens to honor the unseen presence and restore balance. The Japanese approach emphasizes respect and harmony, framing the signals not as warnings, but as gentle prompts to maintain spiritual equilibrium and ensure that the spirit can move on peacefully. In African traditions, similar beliefs exist regarding the spirits of the departed. Knocking or rapping is often considered a form of ancestral communication, signaling that the living should perform a ritual or offer guidance for the departed's journey. These sounds are not feared but respected, as they indicate ongoing interaction between the living and the dead. The signals may be heard in homes, sacred spaces, or burial grounds, serving as a reminder that the dead continue to influence the lives of those they leave behind. The consistency of these beliefs across cultures points to a universal human awareness of death as a process, marked by symbolic signs and ritualized attention. In Mexico, pre-death signals are sometimes incorporated into Day of the Dead traditions. Families recount hearing raps or knocks preceding a loved one's passing, which are then interpreted as spiritual visits from ancestors. These auditory phenomena are woven into broader practices of remembrance, honor, and communication with the departed. The sounds serve both as warnings and as invitations to participate in ceremonies that celebrate the connection between life and death. In this context, death knocks are integrated into communal and familial understanding of mortality, emphasizing continuity, memory, and ritual. Even modern urban cultures retain traces of these beliefs. Across Europe and North America, families continue to report knocking or rapping in moments preceding a loved one's passing, sometimes coinciding with the precise moment of death. While contemporary explanations may suggest psychological or environmental causes, cultural memory persists. Knocking is a language of transition, acknowledgement, and connection. Hospices, and private homes often report similar phenomena, illustrating that death knocks are not merely folklore, but a persistent human experience, bridging centuries and geographies. Across cultures, the interpretation of death knocks often intertwines with ritual and belief, shaping the way communities respond to these mysterious signals. In Scotland and Ireland, families might light candles or leave a window open when they hear the knock, a gesture meant to welcome the departing spirit and guide it safely into the next realm. Such practices are not merely superstitious. They reflect a profound understanding of life and death as a continuum, where the living play an active role in the transition of the soul. By acknowledging the sound, they participate in a timeless ritual, honoring both memory and presence. In Germany, the Todklopfen tradition also emphasizes ritualized response. Families would often gather, observing silence, or reciting prayers in acknowledgement of the sounds. The rhythmic nature of the knocking was sometimes interpreted as a conversation, a series of messages that required careful attention. In this sense, the dead were not silent. They communicated through patterns and sequences reaching across the threshold of life. Ignoring these signals was considered both disrespectful and potentially harmful, as it might prevent the spirit from finding peace, leaving unresolved energy lingering in the household. Across Japan, Yurai disturbances are similarly tied to acknowledgement and respect. When faint knocks or raps are heard, families perform small acts to honor the spirit, lighting incense, offering a prayer, or placing a small token near the source of the sound. The Japanese approach highlights the belief that life and death are interconnected, and that the acknowledgement of presence, even in subtle auditory form, can facilitate harmony. These cultural practices suggest that death knocks are more than omens. They are invitations to actively participate in the spiritual world, to respond to the needs of those who have departed. In African and Caribbean traditions, knocking is often a signal from ancestral spirits. It may coincide with significant life events, such as birth, marriage, or death, linking the rhythm of human life with the ongoing presence of the deceased. Rituals might include offerings, chants, or ceremonies designed to honor the spirits and secure their guidance. In this way, the knocking is not merely a passive phenomenon. It is a dynamic form of communication, embedded in social and spiritual structures that recognize the ongoing influence of the departed on the living. Mexican traditions also integrate auditory phenomena into ritual. Pre-death knocks are sometimes interpreted as visits from ancestors, connecting families with their heritage and reinforcing communal bonds. During the Day of the Dead celebrations, such signals are not feared. They are embraced as evidence of continuity, a reminder that the dead remain present in the lives of the living. The sounds may serve as prompts to prepare altars, offer food, or engage in ceremonies that honor memory, demonstrating a deep respect for the cycles of life and death. Even in modern urban environments, cultural beliefs about death knocks persist, often blending folklore with personal experience. Families report hearing knocking or rapping around the time of a loved one's passing, sometimes coinciding with hospital visits or hospice care. While skeptics may attribute these phenomena to environmental or psychological factors, those who experience them often perceive them as meaningful signals steeped in the cultural memory of centuries of similar reports. Hospitals and care facilities sometimes become spaces where these auditory phenomena are acknowledged quietly as patients, families, and caregivers navigate the boundary between the physical and spiritual. Across all these traditions, several patterns emerge. First, the sounds are often intentional, patterned, and recognizable, carrying information about the departed or signaling imminent death. Second, acknowledgement and ritual are crucial. Cultures that respond to these signals treat them as meaningful communication, ensuring that the spirit is recognized and supported in its transition. Third, death knocks are rarely frightening in intent. They are messages, reminders, and gestures of presence that highlight the enduring connections between life and death. Furthermore, death knocks often serve as teaching tools within cultural contexts. They reinforce the value of attentiveness, the importance of family bonds, and the notion that death is a process rather than an abrupt event. Children and younger members of the community are often educated about these phenomena, learning that subtle signals in the environment may carry profound significance. Through storytelling, ritual, and observation, these practices ensure the continuity of cultural memory and the preservation of ancestral knowledge. In many societies, death knocks are also intertwined with the concept of fate and inevitability. The sound serves as a reminder that life is transient, that the boundary between the living and the dead is permeable, and that attention, respect, and acknowledgement are necessary for the maintenance of harmony. Families interpret the knocking as an opportunity to honor the individual, perform appropriate rituals, and emotionally prepare for the transition that is to come. Across cultures, death knocks are consistently portrayed as both a signal and a guide. In rural England, families would often awaken to a series of raps or knocks that seemed to echo the personality of the deceased. A stern individual might be represented by sharp, deliberate knocks, while a gentle spirit might manifest in soft, rhythmic taps. These distinctions were recognized as deeply personal, and households would respond accordingly, lighting candles, offering prayers, or simply sitting in solemn acknowledgement. The act of recognition was considered essential, not only to honor the departed, but also to maintain harmony within the home, ensuring that lingering energy did not become disruptive. In Ireland, death knocks were similarly intimate. Villagers spoke of hearing specific sequences that indicated who was passing, often accompanied by other subtle signals. A sudden chill, the faint scent of a loved one, or even the brief appearance of a shadow. These experiences were never random. They were carefully observed and interpreted within the cultural framework of ancestral respect and community connection. Rituals might include leaving a door ajar, sprinkling water, or offering quiet prayers, each gesture serving to bridge the worlds of the living and the dead. Such practices illustrate that these auditory phenomena were embedded in daily life, seamlessly integrated into the rhythm of remembrance, mourning, and spiritual awareness. In Germany, Todklopfen carried not only practical significance, but also moral and social weight. Ignoring the knocks was seen as both disrespectful and potentially dangerous, believed to disturb the balance between the living and the dead. Families who honored the sounds often found comfort and guidance, while those who disregarded them were thought to risk the unrest of the departed. This belief reinforced the cultural understanding that death was not merely an individual event, but a communal and spiritual process. The community played a role in acknowledging the transition, maintaining order, and ensuring that the passage of the soul was recognized with reverence. Japanese interpretations also emphasize interaction and respect. The yurei, often responsible for subtle rapping or tapping, are acknowledged through ritual rather than ignored. Families may place offerings of food, flowers, or incense, performing these acts quietly but deliberately. The sounds are interpreted as invitations for engagement rather than threats. This approach highlights a cultural philosophy in which life and death are intertwined, and acknowledgement of the unseen is a means of restoring balance and harmony. The auditory signal becomes a gentle prompt, guiding the living to participate consciously in the ongoing cycle of existence. In African and Caribbean traditions, ancestral knocking serves as both guidance and warning. These sounds may occur before significant life events or during periods of personal upheaval, reminding the living that the ancestors remain present and vigilant. Rituals accompanying the knocks may include music, chanting, or offerings, each action reinforcing the continuity between generations and the responsibility of the living to honor their forebears. The practice underscores the concept that death is not an end, but a transformation, a shift in presence that requires recognition, respect, and integration into communal life. In Mexico, pre-death knocking is often celebrated as part of the broader cultural embrace of the dead during Day of the Dead festivities. Families recount hearing raps that coincide with passing, interpreting these sounds as ancestral visits. The auditory signals are integrated into ceremonies of remembrance and honor, transforming what might be alarming into a meaningful and spiritual experience. These practices illustrate a cultural perspective in which death is not to be feared but observed, respected, and woven into ongoing rituals that reinforce familial and communal bonds. Even in contemporary urban settings, echoes of these cultural beliefs persist. Hospitals, hospices, and private residences often report knocking or rapping around the time of a loved one's passing. While scientific explanations may attribute these occurrences to environmental factors, the cultural memory of death knocks remains strong. Families frequently interpret these sounds as meaningful signals, an enduring testament to the shared human understanding of death as both transition and communication. The persistent interpretation across time and place highlights the universality of this phenomenon. Across all cultures, death knocks share several key characteristics. They are deliberate, patterned, and often personalized, carrying meaning that extends beyond the mere sound. They demand acknowledgement, reinforcing the importance of attention, respect, and ritual. They serve to connect the living with the dead, bridging the physical and spiritual worlds, and they provide a means of emotional preparation, guidance, and comfort. In every society, from Europe to Asia to the Americas, knocking is not random noise. It is a form of language, a way for the unseen to communicate, to guide, and to ensure that the cycle of life and death is observed with reverence. Death knocks across cultures often reveal the universality of human engagement with the unknown. In Scotland, Ireland, and England, families have long observed the subtle yet unmistakable taps that presage a passing. These signals are rarely frightening. They are respected as part of the natural order, a way for the living to acknowledge and participate in the transition of the soul. The measured rhythm of a fetch or a Todklopfen knock communicates both presence and timing, offering an opportunity to prepare emotionally and spiritually. Households would light candles, say prayers, or leave windows ajar, gestures that demonstrate awareness and reverence for the unseen visitor. In Germany, Todklopfen was more than a curious superstition. It was a cultural expectation. Families taught children to listen attentively, to recognize patterns, and to respond appropriately. Ignoring the knocking could bring unease or misfortune, not because of fear itself, but because it was believed to disrupt the natural order of life and death. This practice reinforced communal values, emphasizing responsibility, attentiveness, and respect for the departed. The knock becomes a bridge, a moment where the spiritual and the physical converge, and where acknowledgement ensures harmony both within the home and within the larger cycle of existence. Japanese interpretations of these sounds underscore the importance of ritualized response. Yurai disturbances, whether subtle taps or more pronounced raps, are addressed with quiet ceremonies, incense, and offerings. The focus is on recognition and harmony rather than fear. The auditory signal prompts the living to act, to honor the presence of the spirit and facilitate its peaceful passage. This approach demonstrates a philosophical perspective that sees life and death as intertwined, and the unseen world as an ongoing participant in daily life. By listening, acknowledging, and responding, the living maintain balance and respect for the spiritual forces that inhabit their world. African and Caribbean traditions also emphasize engagement and reciprocity. Knocking or rapping associated with ancestral spirits is interpreted as communication and guidance. The living respond with ceremonies, chants, and offerings, ensuring that the spirit is honored and that its message is understood. This interplay between the audible signal and ritual practice underscores a profound cultural awareness. Death is not the cessation of influence, but a transformation in which the dead continue to interact with the living. In these contexts, knocking is a medium of instruction, warning, or support, reinforcing social cohesion and spiritual awareness. In Mexico, the Day of the Dead encapsulates the enduring nature of these beliefs. Families hear pre-death knocks as invitations from ancestors, integrating the sounds into altars, offerings, and remembrance ceremonies. The auditory signal becomes part of a larger narrative of continuity, memory, and respect, illustrating that death knocks are not isolated phenomena, but embedded in cultural practices that span generations. The emphasis is on participation, observation, and honor, transforming what could be a source of fear into an integral part of communal life and ritual. Modern urban experiences of death knocks continue to reflect these cultural patterns. Families report hearing raps or knocks in hospitals, nursing homes, or private residences shortly before a loved one passes. While skeptics may attribute these sounds to physical causes, the interpretations often remain rooted in cultural memory and personal experience. Individuals may light a candle, sit quietly in acknowledgement, or simply remain attentive to the signal. Even without centuries-old traditions, the instinct to honor and recognize these auditory phenomena persists, demonstrating the universal human impulse to connect with the spiritual during moments of transition. One remarkable aspect of death knocks is their ability to convey information without words. Across cultures, the intensity, pattern, and rhythm of the knocks often reflect the personality of the departing soul, the urgency of the message, or the emotional state surrounding the passing. Sharp, forceful knocks may indicate a sudden or unexpected death, while soft, measured taps may signify a gentle or anticipated transition. Families attentive to these nuances can interpret meaning, allowing the knock to serve as both a warning and a form of communication, a subtle but profound interaction with the unseen. Death knocks also highlight the importance of perception and awareness. Across continents, individuals who are sensitive to spiritual phenomena are more likely to notice these subtle signals. Attention, belief, and openness to the unknown enhance the likelihood of recognition, creating a reciprocal relationship between the living and the dead. The knock is not merely an external sound. It becomes a shared experience where acknowledgement is as vital as the occurrence itself. By listening, interpreting, and responding, the living engage actively with death as a process, ensuring that the cycle of life, transition, and remembrance continues unbroken. In conclusion, cultural beliefs surrounding death knocks reveal a universal human engagement with mortality, ritual, and communication. From Todklopfen in Germany to the Fetch in Scotland, Uri in Japan, ancestral knocks in Africa and the Caribbean, and pre-death signals in Mexico, these auditory phenomena carry meaning, symbolism, and instruction. They demonstrate that death is not a solitary event, but a communal and spiritual process, mediated through sound, recognition, and ritual. Knocking, tapping, or rapping becomes a language that bridges worlds, conveying presence, guidance, and the enduring connection between the living and the departed. In this part, we will delve into the various theories that attempt to explain the phenomenon of the last knock, blending folklore, spiritual belief, and modern investigation. Throughout history, people have struggled to understand why knocking, tapping, or rapping often accompanies moments of passing. Is it a message from the departed, a residual imprint of energy, or something that science can yet explain? The answers are as varied and complex as the accounts themselves, and examining them allows us to appreciate the mystery and the human fascination with the boundary between life and death. One of the oldest interpretations comes from folklore and spiritual traditions. In many cultures, knocking is considered the deliberate act of a departing soul. The idea is that as life leaves the body, the spirit must announce its presence, either as a warning to the living or as a final farewell. These knocks are often described as rhythmic, patterned, and sometimes even personalized, reflecting the personality, habits, or essence of the individual. In Scottish and Irish folklore, the fetch is believed to produce precisely such sounds, acting as both a harbinger of death and a signal that the soul is in transition. The patterns and timing are seen as intentional, requiring acknowledgement from the living to ensure that the departed finds peace. Another enduring theory revolves around residual energy, often referred to as the psychophysical imprint theory. According to this perspective, intense emotions, trauma, or life events can leave an energetic imprint on a location or object. When a person passes, especially under stressful or emotional circumstances, this residual energy may manifest audibly as knocks or raps. Poltergeist researchers suggest that these sounds are not necessarily intentional acts of the spirit, but echoes of energy bound to the physical environment. For example, in homes with a history of grief or tragedy, knocking may occur in locations associated with the individual's final moments, creating a tangible connection between life, death, and space. Poltergeist activity is closely tied to this concept. Unlike the subtle, measured knocks of a fetch or traditional death signal, poltergeist phenomena can be erratic, forceful, and widespread. Researchers have proposed that the energy released during death, combined with the emotional intensity of the living, may act as a catalyst for poltergeist manifestations. In documented cases, objects move, doors slam, and knocking occurs in sequences that appear deliberate yet chaotic. Some experts argue that this energy amplification may produce sounds reminiscent of death knocks, blurring the line between intentional communication from a spirit and residual energy interacting with the physical world. From a psychological standpoint, the perception of death knocks may be influenced by heightened awareness, grief, and anticipation. Humans are wired to recognize patterns and respond to unusual stimuli, particularly in emotionally charged environments. When a loved one is near death, family members may be more attuned to subtle sounds, interpreting creaks, thuds, or taps as meaningful messages. While this does not discount the spiritual or residual energy explanations, it highlights the interplay between perception, expectation, and emotional state. Our brains are remarkably sensitive to cues during periods of stress or grief, and the phenomenon of hearing a last knock may emerge from this heightened attentiveness. Electromagnetic and environmental theories also provide potential explanations. Some researchers suggest that changes in electromagnetic fields, temperature fluctuations, or air pressure within a home can create audible effects that resemble knocking. Wooden floors, loose panels, and structural settling can amplify these sounds, producing taps, raps, or thuds that coincide with moments of high tension or significant events. While this explanation may seem mundane compared to spiritual interpretations, it underscores the complexity of the phenomenon, where physical conditions, human perception, and potential residual energy all intersect to create the experience of a death knock. The cultural persistence of death knocks lends weight to their significance, even when scientific explanations are considered. Across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, societies have recorded patterns of knocking associated with passing, often accompanied by rituals of acknowledgement and honor. These consistent reports suggest that, regardless of whether the cause is spiritual, energetic, or environmental, humans have long recognized a meaningful connection between certain auditory phenomena and the process of death. The knock becomes a universal language, bridging centuries and geographies, a signal that transcends explanation and resonates deeply with our awareness of mortality. Historical accounts often describe death knocks as more than mere sound. They may be accompanied by other sensory experiences, sudden chills, fleeting shadows, changes in light, or subtle smells associated with the individual. In some cases, the combination of auditory and sensory cues creates an unmistakable impression of presence. Folklore often interprets these combined signals as messages, guidance, or final farewells, emphasizing the interconnectedness of the senses and the continuity of life and death. This multi-sensory approach supports the idea that death knocks are part of a larger spectrum of phenomena through which the unseen communicates with the living. In addition to folklore, energy theories, and psychological explanations, some researchers have explored the possibility of an underlying metaphysical mechanism behind death knocks. In this view, consciousness is not confined to the body, and at the moment of death, the spirit may emit a subtle vibrational signal into the surrounding environment. These vibrations could interact with the physical world in ways that produce audible knocks or raps, effectively creating a bridge between the departing soul and those still living. This theory aligns with reports from multiple cultures where the knocking is perceived as intentional, patterned, and responsive, rather than random or coincidental. Certain historical accounts reinforce the notion of intentional communication. In 19th century England, a family reported a series of precise knocks that occurred hours before the death of a relative. The knocks were so specific that household members could count and replicate the pattern. After the passing, the knocks ceased entirely. Scholars analyzing the case noted that the sounds could not be attributed to natural causes, structural settling, or even animal activity. This and similar accounts support the idea that death knocks may involve an active component of consciousness seeking to make contact, bridging the gap between life and death in a way that transcends ordinary physical explanation. Paranormal investigators have often drawn connections between death knocks and poltergeist phenomena, suggesting that both may arise from concentrated emotional or psychic energy. Poltergeists, in particular, are thought to amplify the ambient energy of a household, manifesting in knocking, movement of objects, and other disturbances. When the death of a loved one is imminent, the combined energy of grief, fear, and anticipation may trigger intensified activity, producing what witnesses interpret as last knocks. In this framework, poltergeist activity and death knocks are part of a continuum, with one representing subtle communication and the other a more forceful expression of energy. Psychological factors play a complementary role. Humans are predisposed to find meaning in sound and pattern, particularly during emotionally charged periods. Anticipation, fear, and grief heighten perception, making ordinary noises such as settling floors, pipes, or the wind take on significance. This does not negate spiritual interpretations, but suggests a complex interaction between mind, environment, and possibly residual energy. Awareness and emotional investment amplify the likelihood of perceiving a death knock, and cultural expectation can further shape the experience as individuals are primed to recognize and interpret these signals in a way consistent with tradition. Scientific studies into environmental factors have provided additional context. Changes in air pressure, temperature, and electromagnetic fields can produce sounds that mimic knocking. In older homes, wooden beams, loose panels, and uneven flooring can resonate in ways that amplify minor shifts, creating repetitive raps or thuds. While these explanations account for some occurrences, they do not fully explain the timing or patterning often reported in conjunction with death. When such sounds coincide precisely with the passing of an individual, many researchers acknowledge that physical explanations may be insufficient, leaving space for interpretations rooted in consciousness, energy, or the unseen. Cross-cultural consistency adds further intrigue. From Todklopfen in Germany to fetch sightings in Scotland, from Japanese Uri raps to Mexican pre-death signals, knocking phenomena have been reported in diverse societies over centuries. This consistency suggests that the phenomenon is not purely coincidental or environmental, but taps into a universal human experience. The perception of transition, the acknowledgement of mortality, and the recognition of presence beyond the physical form. Across time and space, people have responded to death knocks with ritual, acknowledgement, and reverence, reinforcing the idea that these sounds are meaningful and worthy of attention. In many accounts, death knocks serve a dual function, warning and comfort. They alert the living to imminent loss, allowing for preparation and closure, while simultaneously offering a sense of continuity, connection, and presence. Families report that acknowledging the sound, lighting a candle, saying a prayer, or simply listening, often brings a sense of peace. The knock becomes more than a signal. It is a bridge, a fleeting but tangible connection between worlds, offering guidance, farewell, and reassurance in equal measure. Many theories about the last knock converge on the idea that these signals represent a form of communication that transcends ordinary human understanding. Spiritual interpretation suggests that the departing soul uses the knock to assert its presence, leaving a final impression before crossing into the unknown. The precise rhythm, timing, and placement of the knock often align with personal habits or emotional states of the deceased, suggesting an intimate connection that bridges life and death. These knocks are not chaotic. They are measured, meaningful, and in many accounts, unmistakable to those attuned to the subtle cues of the unseen world. Residual energy theory complements this perspective by framing the knock as a lingering echo of emotion. Intense experiences, particularly those associated with death, grief, or trauma, can imprint upon the environment. When the conditions are right, this energy can manifest audibly, producing rhythmic knocking or tapping that appears purposeful. Unlike spiritual interpretations, which emphasize consciousness and intent, residual energy explanations view the phenomenon as a byproduct of emotion interacting with physical space. The effect can be just as powerful to those who witness it, blurring the lines between intentional communication and energetic resonance. Parapsychologists have long studied the intersection of poltergeist activity and death knocks. Poltergeists, often characterized by object movement, slamming doors, and audible disturbances, may amplify ambient energy during periods of heightened emotional tension. The impending death of a loved one provides exactly such conditions, creating a conduit through which unseen forces can manifest. In many documented cases, poltergeist-like activity coincides with the final hours of life, suggesting that these phenomena may operate along a spectrum, from subtle, intentional knocks to more overt, chaotic expressions of residual or spiritual energy. From a psychological standpoint, humans are naturally predisposed to find meaning in sound, especially under conditions of stress or anticipation. When a loved one is near death, heightened awareness can lead to perceiving faint noises, creaking floors, shifting furniture, or subtle taps as messages. Cultural context further shapes interpretation. In societies with strong traditions surrounding death knocks, individuals are primed to recognize and attribute significance to even the smallest auditory cues. This interplay between perception, expectation, and environment can enhance the experience, making the knock feel deliberate and imbued with meaning, whether or not it originates from a conscious source. Scientific investigations into environmental factors also provide potential explanations. Variations in air pressure, temperature fluctuations, and electromagnetic fields can produce subtle sounds that resemble knocking. Structural elements of buildings, wooden beams, loose panels, and uneven floors can resonate to create rhythmic raps or thuds. While these factors may account for some occurrences, they rarely explain the full scope of experiences, particularly the timing, consistency, and personalized patterns reported across cultures. This leaves space for interpretations that include consciousness, spiritual presence, or residual energy interacting with the physical environment. Cross-cultural observations suggest that death knocks are a near-universal phenomenon. From Todklopfen in Germany to the Fetch in Scotland, from Japanese Uri raps to Mexican pre-death signals, these auditory phenomena appear consistently across time and geography. The widespread reporting of similar experiences points to an underlying human perception of transition, mortality, and presence beyond the physical. Even in modern urban settings, accounts persist in hospitals, care facilities, and private homes, demonstrating that cultural memory, awareness, and emotional context continue to shape how death knocks are perceived and interpreted. Many accounts emphasize the emotional and practical functions of death knocks. They often serve as warnings, alerting the living to an imminent passing, while simultaneously providing comfort and closure. Families frequently report that acknowledging the knock, through prayer, lighting a candle, or quiet reflection, brings a sense of peace, as if the signal carries a message of farewell or reassurance. In this sense, the knock functions on multiple levels. It is both a bridge between worlds and a tool for emotional preparation, blending the spiritual, psychological, and physical in a singular moment of recognition. Ultimately, the phenomenon of the last knock remains elusive, defying simple categorization. Spiritual beliefs, residual energy theories, poltergeist activity, psychological factors, and environmental conditions all offer pieces of the puzzle. Yet none alone can fully explain the consistency, timing, and emotional impact of these auditory experiences. Perhaps the mystery lies precisely in that ambiguity. The last knock exists at the intersection of life, death, perception, and belief, a fleeting but profound reminder of the enduring connection between the living and the departed. As we move toward the conclusion of our exploration into the last knock, it becomes clear that this phenomenon resonates on multiple levels: spiritual, cultural, psychological, and even physical. Across centuries and continents, people have reported hearing knocks, raps, and taps associated with the imminent passing of a loved one. While explanations vary, the core experience remains remarkably consistent. A subtle, often rhythmic signal that commands attention, evokes emotion, and bridges the seen and unseen worlds. Spiritual interpretation suggests that these knocks are the conscious act of the departing soul. In this view, the knock serves as a farewell, a message, or a warning, a way for the individual to communicate even after leaving the physical body. Across cultures, such as in Scotland, Ireland, and Mexico, these sounds are regarded with reverence, often accompanied by ritual and acknowledgement. Families light candles, recite prayers, or simply observe in quiet attention, honoring the presence of the spirit and ensuring a peaceful transition. These actions reinforce the idea that the knock is not random, but intentional, meaningful, and deeply personal. Residual energy theories offer a complementary perspective, framing death knocks as echoes of intense emotional or physical energy left behind. These imprints, bound to objects or spaces, may manifest audibly when environmental conditions are right. Poltergeist researchers suggest that such energy can become amplified during periods of high emotion, creating the perception of deliberate knocking. Even if these sounds originate from energy rather than consciousness, they still function as meaningful signals, offering a moment of awareness and reflection for those present. Psychological explanations remind us of the human element in the phenomenon. Anticipation, grief, and heightened attentiveness can lead to the perception of subtle sounds as meaningful. In emotionally charged moments, ordinary environmental noises, floor creaks, pipes, or distant taps may be interpreted as intentional communication. Cultural context reinforces this perception, as traditions and stories prime individuals to recognize and attribute significance to these experiences. The knock becomes a shared interaction between mind, environment, and belief, illustrating how perception shapes reality in the most intimate of circumstances. Environmental factors provide additional clarity with variations in air pressure, temperature, and structural shifts contributing to audible effects that mimic knocking. Old homes, creaking wood, and loose panels can produce patterns that seem deliberate. Yet the coincidence of these sounds with moments of death, often accompanied by other sensory cues such as chills, fleeting shadows, or changes in light, leaves a space for the unexplained. The convergence of physical, emotional, and spiritual elements creates a rich tapestry of experience that transcends simple explanation, reinforcing the mystery and significance of the last knock. Cross-cultural consistency highlights the universality of this phenomenon. Whether it is Todklopfen in Germany, fetch sightings in Scotland, Uri raps in Japan, or ancestral knocks in Africa and Mexico, reports share striking similarities: patterned sound, timing with death, and emotional resonance. Even in modern urban environments, accounts persist in hospitals, homes, and care facilities, showing that the last knock continues to hold meaning, shaping how humans perceive mortality, presence, and the transition between life and death. Death knocks also serve a practical and emotional purpose. They prepare the living for loss, offering a final moment of awareness, reflection, and acknowledgement. Many families describe feeling a sense of closure or reassurance when they hear the knock, as if it carries the departing soul's blessing or farewell. The sound functions simultaneously as a warning, a comfort, and a bridge between worlds, illustrating the multifaceted significance of this phenomenon. Ultimately, the last knock reminds us that death is not a solitary event. It is a process woven into culture, belief, perception, and environment. The knocking may arise from spirit, energy, psychological attunement, or natural phenomena, yet its impact on the living is profound and undeniable. It speaks to the universal human need to connect, to understand, and to honor the transition from life to whatever lies beyond. As we conclude this journey through knocks, taps, and signals of death, we are left with both answers and questions. The last knock persists as a mystery, a fleeting signal that challenges our understanding and invites reflection. Whether a deliberate farewell from a soul, an echo of energy, or a moment shaped by perception and emotion, it remains a profound testament to the enduring connection between the living and the departed. Thank you for accompanying us through these haunted tales and whispered signals. As the night grows quiet and shadows deepen, listen closely. Perhaps, somewhere in the stillness, a knock awaits, reminding us that even in passing, presence lingers, and the last signal is never truly gone.